Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Footnotes and Fairytales with me, Damien Fox. This is a platform that I hope showcases the people of Newry and their stories. My guest today is a multimedia news and sports journalist. He is a passionate Newry City fan. I firmly believe that if you were to cut him, his blood would run blue. It's a cause and a team that he's always championed. But I think more broadly than that, and I don't know if he'll say it of himself, I think he's always championed Newry, which is an admirable quality. So I'd like to introduce you today to my guest, Gareth McCullough. Hi, Gareth. How are you?
I'm good, Damon. How are you? Thanks for inviting me on.
No problem. I have to admit, I was equally intrigued and apprehensive in interviewing you, given that you work in the industry, you're a journalist. I was like, what do I ask the man that normally asks the questions? So don't judge me too harshly.
No.
So as I said, I've touched upon journalism, and that's your background. I wanted to understand first and foremost, what was your introduction to it, and was it always an aspiration to be a journalist?
Very good question. That's a if you're looking critiqued on your questions, that's a very good opener. Because it's not something I've probably thought about a whole lot. I would say, Damon, probably when I was back in high school, we went to Newry High, and I would have, if anybody would know me, I would have played hockey. I still attempt to now. I use the word attempt loosely, and I think probably back maybe when I was 14, 15, maybe in around there. We had a good school hockey team. We participated and we won a lot of tournaments. We got the All Irelands and things like that. And I noticed that reading the Newry Reporter, our match reports maybe weren't in it, or our coach was maybe putting in, wee bits and pieces. We were getting a wee snippet, and I always felt that the Reporter was a really good sort of a bastion of local journalism and letting people know what was going on. Obviously, local papers are so critical. And I just thought, I don't know, I had a passion for writing. My sister's a really good writer. She won prizes for it when she was younger, and maybe I took it from her. So then I basically started providing match reports, and then sort of giving them to, and they were back in those days. They were handwritten. There was no email or any of that sort of crack. So they were sent in then to Jimmy Davis, God rest him, and Jimmy would have put them in. And I think from there, probably any journalist will tell you, especially somebody that's worked in newspapers, they will, whenever you see, whether your name's on it or not, but whenever you see the work that you've done in print, and you maybe you walk into a cafe or wherever it may be, or you see somebody with the Reporter open, and you're going, oh, that random person who I maybe don't know is reading the stuff. Maybe they're not, but it's there for them to read. I think that maybe sparked something, and then as people will know, anybody that knows me, are you allowed to swear in this podcast, by the way?
Absolutely, whatever you want, man. No doubt I'll swear too.
just want to check out beforehand. I think most people that know me know I probably talk a lot of shite. So if you can put that, if you can put pen to paper, I suppose, or put it down on your computer, then I think, and you can obviously tone it down and hone it a wee bit. Then I think it's I have a passion for sort of wanting to know what's going on, and I don't mean that in a nosy sense, but sort of wanting to sort of see what people are doing, wanting to publicize good things that are happening. And I think that was probably where my sort of career sparked, I suppose. I think one thing I will say about journalism, and I think everybody has this perception, and given some of the things that have happened, maybe with, I suppose, maybe tabloids, in England over the past, and phone tapping and all this sort of nonsense, and sensationalist journalism. I think it's one thing I always say to people: we have a duty as the media, as I think a responsibility, to highlight the positive stories, highlight the good things that are happening. People, don't get me wrong, people love a bit of dirt, they love a bit of scandal, but by the same token, you have to be there. You have to be a champion of things that people are doing well, or good things that are happening, whether it's in your area, whether it's on a national scale as I'm working now, or whatever it is. So I think maybe that was probably it. That's a very good question. That's something I've just that's all just stream of consciousness stuff I just said there. So nobody's ever asked that before.
Well, it has taken me about a day to come up with it, so I don't deserve too much credit. So you mentioned someone that you submitted those early, score sheets or
match reports,
match reports to. I wanted to ask then in turn, Is there one person or people in the beginning when you first started in a newsroom or working for the reporter? Of all those people, was there one person or people in particular that had an impact in you that in some way perhaps cemented the idea that this is an industry I love now, I think I can be good at, and I want to essentially work here going forward? Is there anyone that stands out?
I suppose I would, there are a few people are still working in the industry now. A few people that I don't know where they are now, what they're doing. But I mean, just to go back to that name I mentioned, and Jimmy Davis. I mean, when you have a passion for sport, my background in sport, try to get involved in as many sports as possible, whether it's watching, attempting to play or writing about it. And I came back from university in Liverpool, and I'd done a work placement with the Newry Democrat actually before my last year in university, and I was actually offered a job, and before I went back to university, and I decided no, I wanted to get my education, and I ended up doing sort of, I suppose, shift work for the Democrat on my return. So it was about 2004, and loved it. Great people, still a lot of good people there. I mean, I work with Steve Malone, who's still there, who's one of a really good mate of mine, great lad, passionate Armagh fan, who would have a lot of time for, and certainly we worked together quite closely over the years. But when I moved to the Reporter in 2007, I think it was actually a news journalist role, and at that time it wasn't my passion. My passion was sport, and I think I'd still veer towards sport even nowadays. But the first 6 months, I'll be honest with you, probably, and not through anybody else's doing, I probably didn't really enjoy it as much, just because I didn't feel it was my forte.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Jimmy coming to me one day and just saying, "Son, you come and work with me, son." He says, "You want to work in sport," and he just took me under his wing, and there was no pressure on you to do this, no pressure on you to do that. Jimmy had his way of doing things, and Jimmy had done those things for years and years and years. But I think anybody, I think most people that are probably listening, if not all people, everybody that's listening to this podcast will have had some dealing in some way, shape, or form with Jimmy Davis, or will know who Jimmy Davis is. And that man, honestly, was definitely a shaping person in my career, just in terms of the level of work he did was beyond ridiculous. He probably made more work for himself, to be honest, but he loved it. His work was his hobby as well, and it just the amount of people he knew, the amount of people he had respect for, who had respect for him back, and you knew how to speak to people. Now, I was coming in as this young buck, my own ideas about what journalism was and what way I was going to do it and things like that. And yeah, you do try and implement some of those. Don't get me wrong, but
Did you study journalism?
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
journalism in Liverpool, which is great. I mean, with great fun actually doing it, because even like journalistic law, was obviously a key part of it. And we were speaking to our law lecturer, was a guy who lived in the same area as where Jamie Bulger was murdered in 1993, and was able to give us the whole background and the facts. And we were having, sort of debates on how that was reported and stuff, and really, really interesting. Now, it's not maybe something I necessarily had to delve into too much in terms of my career, particularly the sporting element of it. But to go back to Jimmy, yeah, I mean, we probably had different views on how things worked, and different, we come from different eras, and Jimmy going towards the end of his career. But there are very few people that I can think of. Certainly, there's nobody on a local level that matches up to him, just in terms of the person he was and what he did, and how much he passionately cared and loved Newry and sport in Newry and people in Newry. And that's why, look, I mean, it was absolutely heartbreaking when he passed away, because he's just a good guy. Like, the term "salt of the earth" would be made up for Jimmy. I suppose going on to very early on, when I started my journalism career, when I was with the Democrat, a few of your older viewers might remember the Ireland Saturday Night, the sports paper that came out on the Saturday evening about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and people used to queue at Fitzpatrick's shop in North Street for it, and it was all the match reports of the day, all the Irish League matches and stuff like that. So I get into that somehow, can't remember how, but very early on. So you're filing match reports for them. We were filing your halftime, your first half match report at halftime. You're phoning into a copy taker, and she was typing away, and completely different era of doing it now. And So I met a lot of national journalists, a lot of national football journalists that are still working now, like Stephen Bacon, that's the chief sports writer of the Belfast Telegraph, Mark McIntosh, that's the chief sports writer for the Sun, and I still see those guys regularly now, and they've always been a good source of advice and a good sort of sounding board, and you see how those guys are dealing with international footballers or dealing with professional footballers, and they've been really interesting just to watch and just to almost sort of study from afar, I feel like. And then obviously through that, so you're covering a lot of GAA and you're covering down matches, you're covering Armagh matches, and you're seeing, some of the sort of the big names, I suppose, if you like, the big name GAA journalists, and you get a feel for somebody that didn't grow up with the sport, didn't able to watch it, but didn't play it, wasn't involved in the club, didn't have an affinity. Loved it, absolutely loved getting in it. Love the people that you meet at those matches, and I'm certainly not an aficionado in the sport, but I'm certainly somebody that loves watching it, loves meeting the players, loves meeting the supporters, and hear how passionately people talk about it. So all the different elements, I suppose, to get back to the question, it sort of all melds into one, really. But if I had to pick one, Damien, it would be Jimmy Davis straight away.
I suppose just touched upon your point about GAA. I suppose you're lucky enough in so much as you can sit on the fence. You don't have to side with either Armagh or Down. So I want to talk about, obviously there's a creative energy and something in you that wanted to, I guess, channel that into something, and journalism being the platform of choice. I mean, writing creatively is one thing. The parameters are a lot broader, but I mean, journalism is a lot more, I guess, articulate. The parameters are tighter. How difficult was for you to kind of find that journalistic voice?
In terms of in my initial stages of my career, if you like.
Yeah.
I suppose you just. I actually think when I look back at it, I couldn't maybe pick a moment, if you like. It just sort of gradually. I think you gradually, the more experience you get, it's a cliche. People say if you're not learning, if you're standing still, you're not constantly improving, you're going backwards because somebody's going to overtake you. Particularly in modern day journalism, every graduate now wants to come out and go straight into television. They're not interested in having a grounding in a local paper or anything like that. And I know local papers are certainly fallen by the wayside, I suppose, to an extent in comparison to broadcasting, but having that grounding gave me that experience, and then you learn from that. And there is nothing like, whenever you're working for a local paper, there is nothing like writing something that somebody disagrees with and somebody pulling you in a pub and saying to you, what was that shit you wrote in the paper? And I was like, well, it's my opinion. I was like, but by and large, it would be a match report. And, that's fine. If you disagree with that opinion, that's what it's about. It's just part of a journalist's, I suppose, part of a journalist's remit, I suppose, to an extent, is to provoke a reaction. And when I say provoke, I don't mean to poke the bear or it's to get some sort of emotion flowing. It's to whether people disagree with it, whether people think it's an awful piece of writing, whether they disagree with the content, or if you're rating somebody out of 10 in a football match and they say, well, my rating should have been higher. And I got that repeatedly from Uri City players, by the way, and if they're listening to this, they'll know who they are. But it's sort of, I think you just sort of, you find out what people like and dislike, and you grow from that. But then at the same time, you can't compromise. If I wrote something and you read it and go, I totally disagree with that. Why didn't you go down this angle? Why didn't you do this? That's great, and that's feedback, and that's constructive feedback, and that's great. But it doesn't mean that well, Damien Fox said to me, I need to change the way I write here. If you need to be stick to your principles, I think you have to have a bit of bravery, I suppose. Now, some people might disagree with that. Some people might say, well, what's brave about sitting behind a computer and writing something, and you're almost not faceless because your mug's in the paper half the time, so you're pretty obvious sometimes. But that to me, that was how I sort of found my voice, and going, right, well, I'd be opinionated. I think you have to be, by and large, as a journalist. So sometimes got me into trouble, and rightly so. And that's just the lay of the land. That's the way it happens. You had Marty McGuigan on the previous episode, and if there's a guy who's opinionated, it's Marty, like a great lad, but and one of the funniest guys ever, but he's opinionated, and I think you have to sort of stick to your principles. You have to stick to what you feel and what you feel is right, and until somebody is able to prove you wrong. And once you find that sort of your place, if you like, in terms of, and going back, obviously, in terms of working for the Democrat and the Reporter, where I was going, well, for example, like I started, my first thing was writing about Newry City, writing about the team I support. And, you know, I can remember my first match report that I wrote for the Democrat. I think Newry got beaten at home to Larne, maybe 3-0. And this is when Larne were crap, not the Larne that are winning the Irish League now. And I remember writing about the striker that was there at the time, who I knew pretty well. He wasn't a local guy, but a guy called Mark Dixon. And I wrote, I think it was about 2003, and I said, Mark Dixon, the striker who, striker he couldn't hit a, I don't think I used the term couldn't hit a cow's arse with a banjo, but it was terms like that. But then I caveated that with, well, Ruud van Nistelrooy wouldn't score in this Newry team. Ruud van Nistelrooy was the goal scorer at the time. He's like, because we were crap. And then I sort of realised very quickly when I was going down the next time to the Newry game, we were getting the odd funny look, and you were getting a few sideways looks from players and stuff. And just going, well, lads, if you disagree with it, say it to me. You know what I mean? Don't be, or play better. You know what I mean? I was only writing what I saw.
Were you strong in your convictions from the get-go in terms of, I mean, it's not something I necessarily would have thought about in so much as that you're a local journalist at this time, and then ultimately in many instances, or some at least, you're perhaps confronted by a person that you've wrote about. Were you strong enough in your convictions then that regardless of what people said, it would never sway what you would write about or how you would write about it?
I think so. Yeah, I can't think of too many occasions where I would have sort of succumbed to pressure. And I mean, I know, look, in my latter sort of times at the Reporter, when Paul Welsh was editor, and Paul, as probably most people know, was very vociferous in his criticism of Newry Mourne Down District Council, and rightly so, because he was holding them to account in terms of it's the public purse, and people need to know, ratepayers need to know where the money's going. I came in for an awful lot of criticism, but you generally, if you have a strong editor and you have a strong team around you, then you get that support. So you get that back in house initially, but then you should have that within yourself anyway. If you're prepared to put something down on paper, or you're prepared to say something on radio or whatever it may be, you need, and it's an opinion, you need to have the courage of your convictions to stand up, and be able to back that opinion. I mean, I can tell you, I remember a particular example. I'll not name him, but again, most of the debates and most of the criticism, I suppose, would have been around football, and ironically reporting on Newry City, who are my club, and people, I think, maybe expected me, just because I supported them, just to paint everything in sweetness and light, and that's not the way it works. That's not me. I'm not doing my job then, Ironically, I think I was PRO of the club at the time, so it was a bit of a double-edged sword. I don't think that really should have been allowed, but anyway, but a player who at the time was coming through as a young player, very highly rated, and was, shall we say, on the pitch more concerned about what other players were doing than what he was doing. And remember, the end of one season, I was out somewhere in Newry, and he was absolutely pissed and came over to me, and I had basically I'd criticised him in the paper, going, this lad has bags of talent. I said, but if he doesn't knuckle down and doesn't sort himself out, he says he's not going to go anywhere in the game. He says, but if he does, he's a potential to go right to the top. And as it turned out, he did go pretty far within Irish League circles. But he came up to me pissed one night and said, what shit are you writing in the paper about me? And I was like, hold on a second, you're drunk for a start. But he says, no, that's my question. And I was like, well, okay. He says, that's my opinion. I says, but tell me what I've written that's factually incorrect. He says, if you can tell me, and you disagree with me, that's fine. He says, tell me why you disagree with me. And he argued, and he couldn't give me reasons, because he was standing there absolutely mangled for a start. And that was part of the thing I was hinting at, because his off-field stuff, his career wasn't going to go the trajectory that everybody thought it should go. And to be fair, he knuckled down that summer. Now, nothing to do with me, I'm sure, but he knuckled down that summer, got his first team place, became a mainstay of the club for a few years, and went on to bigger clubs and had a really successful career. And no issues with him now, and he would have said it to me in future years, going, you remember that? I remember coming back, I'm not sure how you remember it, because you were blocked, but it's been talked about since, and I think then that I was quite early in my journalistic career, so you sort of realise maybe the impact your words can have. Now, that was maybe a positive that he sort of realised, going, well, I'm going to get criticised, if I don't sort myself out. Now, not just by me, you get criticised by the manager and coaches and stuff, but you can also have a negative effect. If you're writing a more sensitive story, I think you need to be aware of the sensitivities around it, and what it is you're talking about, and that would more so go for news stories, because you maybe could be talking about somebody whose relative has passed away, or there's been a court case or something like that, but yeah, I think if you don't have the courage or convictions, then you're in the wrong game, but there is a fine line as well by sticking to your guns,
Yeah.
but not coming across as really arrogant, and not coming across as going, well, I know better than you. Just because you write something doesn't put you on a pedestal to try and get the people, especially not working in a local newspaper, because there are no people like your own local people that will tell you very quickly and bring you back down to earth, and no more so than Yuri, so yeah, fair enough. Like, I guess I understand it. Understood what way it worked very, very quickly, I think.
How much of a labour of love is it for you? I mean, I get the sense, not for everyone, but for some journalists, that it's more a vocation.
Mm.
You,
Yeah.
you know, in many ways, you live and breathe it, an artist might, or somebody else in a creative field. It can be much more of a lifestyle, as well as just a 9 to 5. So
100%.
in that respect, I want to, because you probably in some way are personally impacted emotionally or otherwise by some of your stories. But in hindsight, looking back, in all your journalistic career, what are some of the highs and lows? Like, what are some that you took true joy from writing about? And what were some of those stories that might have impacted you, that either you find no great joy in it, or that it was a story that perhaps impacted you emotionally?
I think in general, just to touch on your first point, absolutely. I mean, I can't remember ever doing a 9 to 5 job. Journalism, if you want to get a 9 to 5 job, journalism is not your job. It's the least 9 to 5 job, and even more so as as the years go on, it's less of a 9 to 5 job. With mobile journalism now, and you're expected to be, it's almost 24/7, and we're all aware of that fact. That doesn't stop it getting to you. It doesn't stop it getting to you mentally, emotionally, and then that leads in times physically. It's not just, we all just don't sit behind a computer and sort of type away, or sit in your backside. Like, I mean, it's non-stop, and I probably found, since I moved to Cool FM over the last 20 months or so, that an awful lot more stories where I find you're doing a lot, because I'm doing a lot more news, or they're more, they affect me a lot more, because you're doing a lot more, you're speaking to people who have lost loved ones an awful lot more. In terms of, I'll come back to that in a wee second, but in terms of the high, I mean, there are so many stories, but I mean, the one, as a sports journalist, somebody that's passionate for sport, I don't think anything will top the All-Ireland final of 2010, down against Cork. That period, over up the preceding months, when they were going through the All-Ireland series and the quarterfinals and the semi-finals, you got to know the players really, really well, and some of them have become really good friends since. And then you got to know wee James, got to know James McCartan as well, and because you were there at every single game, you almost maybe gained the respect a wee bit, because you were there and you were able to comment on it, because you were there and you were seeing everything that was going on, maybe the people weren't seeing on TV. But I remember sitting in the press box of the Hogan Stand on All-Ireland Final Day in 2010 and just going, yeah, this is the peak, like 82,500 people, just ridiculous atmosphere. Just, you're going, I will never report on a game this big again, unless, I mean, Champions League finals don't have 82,500 people at them, what I mean? Unless I report in a World Cup final, I don't think I'll get bigger than that. And I appreciate people that have been to All-Ireland finals every single year and maybe report on them. It's different for them. But, in the build up to that, I'm sure some of your viewers will remember, I digress here for a second, the riffraff rooms on above the Phoenix, run by Shamie Rafferty and Conan Fagan and Conor McCoy, and I actually DJ'd there around that time, which was people. Well, I played record, I played music. I don't know whether it could be classed as DJ, but it was brilliant time for about 18 months, great crack. But I always remember after, I think it was the All Ireland semi final, down beat, I beat Kerry or Kildare, I can't remember. But all the players come back in afterwards. The entire squad come in, and they were dancing away and they're having a great time. And it was funny because people walking in going, hey, there's Danny Hughes or Benny Coulter, there's blah blah blah, and they're all superstars at the time, you know. And I was the double-edged sword. I was like DJ and I was playing music, but then I was writing about them as well. Like, and they were coming up and giving me stick, but it was also you're getting to know them as people. And then after the All Ireland final, I'll never forget, because you got to know these boys well as people, not just as players, as you know, boys going out for 70 minutes on the pitch. So obviously it was, you know, they lost by a point. That was very tough to take for them, and I certainly got emotional sitting up in the Hogan stand because I was gutted for them as people because I knew the work they'd put in. But if anybody has ever been in Croke Park and in the sort of the bowels of Croke Park, there's literally a road runs underneath the Hogan stand and right round underneath the Cusack stand. And to go and do your interview, sometimes you're in the Hogan, you have to walk the whole way around the underneath of the stadium. And it depends where they are, but I remember going down the lift and it's going, I have to interview these boys. I have to get something out of these boys. You know what I mean? It's just lost an All-Ireland final by a point. Some boys aren't going to get here again, like, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing Danny Hughes and Damien Rafferty were two of the guys who had sort of got to know pretty well over that period. And walking down, and the two boys come out of the change room. I don't know whether they're put forward to do interviews or whether they just come out of their own volition. And before he even pressed record my dictaphone or whatever, it was just a hug. We all just hugged each other. Like, the boys were in tears. They were grown men that were, you know, built like tanks and all the rest of it. They just played an All-Ireland final, but it showed the emotion of sport, and that's what I love about it, because you can have that really high emotion, you can have that really low emotion. It was almost the same. So I was having this high emotion going, oh, All-Ireland final, amazing, reporting on it. You're coming down and seeing these boys that were actually playing on it, just, you know, crestfallen. But then, you know, sort of in terms of not a low, but something probably two positive stories, I suppose, that have come out of tragedy, if you like. And since I've been working with McCullough, last year I interviewed young Daniel Greer that had the stem cell bone marrow donation. That there was 1 in 10 million chance of him getting a match, and there's a big campaign. And I went and interviewed his mum at our kitchen table, and it's quite cynical. This is a cynical part of journalism. I know that what's going to make this a real powerful story is that the more emotional she gets, because this is powerful. It's going to make people listen. It's not for my benefit, you know. But his mum broke down in tears as but as I was interviewing her, and talked the way through it, but was inconsolable because, you know, her son was in a really bad way at the time, and thankfully he's doing well now. But you were just going, this is tough. Like, you know, he didn't, you know. I was sitting in tears talking to her, and I'm like, I'm all I'm doing is asking her questions. You know, what have I to be emotional about? But it's other people. I think other people's reaction probably affects me most. So
I think that's quite interesting, because I mean, when you think of journalism as a whole, people hope that it's always objective in its writing, that there's no bias. But when you're dealing with a very human story, you can't wholeheartedly remain objective. You're going to feel that, of course.
100%. I think
that's interesting.
I think most people have most people. I'm sure most people you have on here have that bit of humanity and a little bit of empathy. That, you know, you might not have been in that situation, and certainly I've never been in the situation that Daniel Greer's family have been in. But you can at least show some sort of humanity towards them and go, okay. And this is go back to what I said earlier. You know, this was a story where we're really trying to put this out as much as possible to try and get people to sign up to the register. And they had the biggest spike after. I mean, it was myself and other media outlets. And I mean, the whole story was broken in the first instance by Brian Hyland at the Newry Reporter. He was the first person ever to report on it. And again, Brian, another good mate of mine and a brilliant journalist, the best community journalist I've ever seen. A really good guy, really good friend. He broke the story, and over the sort of following 2 weeks, everybody had it, and everybody was sort of doing interviews and put it out there, and they ended up getting a match because there was a massive spike in people signing up to the register, and that in itself sort of went. That was a really tough interview to do at the time for the family, but they knew they had to get that story out there because it was one of their last chances. That's where the media can be a positive, I think. And thankfully, I say, I think he's doing much better now. By the same token, only a few weeks ago, I went up to Kevin and Ethna Bell's house to interview them about 10 years since Kevin's passing, and I think I knew Kevin sort of through mutual friends. I didn't know him, but I knew him when I was out and about. You'd see him. I'd be good friends with James McCaffrey and things like that, and he was obviously Kevin's best friend. And went up and spoke to him, and it still hurts both of them. And Ethna, was very, very emotional when we were talking about it. But it was so powerful, and they're two of the nicest people you could ever meet. And the whole Newry thing came through. I mean, and that made, when I was putting that out in a national broadcast platform, to me, like, a colleague came out with this line. He said, there's absolutely no doubt KBRT wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the people in Newry. And that, to me, that made me really, really proud. Like, and even emotional, even talking about it now, because I remember that night in the Canal Court where they had the quiz to raise money to bring Kevin home, and just remember looking and going, holy shit, look at the amount of people here. This is amazing. And I remember putting a Facebook post up that night and said, people can run down Newry all they want. He says, there's nowhere like it when it comes to something like this, where people come together. So to be able to do that story for them, for me, but for them as well, and for them to talk so eloquently, so openly, and put it out there, and talk about Newry as well. To me, it was quite a sort of proud moment. But it's obviously tinged with ridiculous sadness. But then you flip that, and you got the positives that have come out of a tragedy, and the amount of people amount of families they have helped. So there's I found, as I said earlier, I found a lot more sort of probably emotional stories, a lot more affecting stories since I've gone to work for Cool, because you're speaking to a lot of different people. And we did a whole thing in the Good Friday Agreement, the 25th anniversary, and I spoke to Jerry Kelly from Sinn Féin, and he spoke really, really eloquently and really honestly about what he felt. And then the flip side of that, I spoke to Alan McBride, who lost his wife in the Shankill bomb, and Alan readily admits he chased Jerry Adams around the world for 2 years after. A victims campaigner, and it spoke so powerfully. And just listening to somebody's story, somebody that was born in 1981, so I caught enough of the troubles to know enough about it. But listening to somebody that had a personal experience, it's just like, and how I'm not sure if I'd been in their situation, I'd been able to keep myself together and intervene in years, never mind being able to talk openly and so eloquently and so measured and balanced about it. It's just that's the plus side of journalism, where you get to speak to people who you maybe wouldn't get to speak to in a different walk of life.
So if you want to talk to me just about where you're at now in terms of your career, because if I'm honest, I'd only ever known you having worked at the Reporter. And I don't keep a finger in the pulse, really. I've only recently come onto social media to kind of put this podcast out there. So I'm quite blind to the world. In many respects, I shut myself away. But I've just connected with you recently on Facebook, and I'd seen that you're now doing some things with Cool FM and Downtown Radio and stuff. So if you want to talk me through what you're doing now, and are you at a point now where you're like fully immersed in the kind of journalism that you wanted to be?
I think the journey. So I moved to Cool in October 2021. So it was 14 years at the Reporter, and I think the last 4 of those was sports editor. And the job is at Cool and Downtown is multimedia news and sports reporter. So I would say probably 95% of the sport content that is going out. I think we've 4 sport bulletins a day, and 95% of the content comes from, I might not read it, I'm very rarely reading it, but it's coming from interviews I've got, or I'm putting them together and somebody else is reading them. So, and then you're doing a lot of news on top of that as well, which is really interesting. It's not something I actually thought that I would be I would enjoy doing as much of as I do. But it's some of those stories that I've touched on there. That's part of the reason why I enjoy it. And the big thing for me is getting out and talking to people. And when you're at a national broadcaster, rightly or wrongly, you do get more respect. If I walk about with this big yellow Cool FM mic muff that is the least inconspicuous mic muff you can ever see in your life, people will actually come over to you. Whereas if you're working for the New Reporter, and you've no sort of no branding on you, people aren't necessarily, unless they know you, they're not. You'll go, no, I don't really want to do an interview or whatever. So, I suppose the biggest difference, if you think about it, this I'm coming from long form journalism. So when I started in the Reporter, we were doing 96 pages a week, which is crazy. And that was the good times. It was before the credit crunch and things like that. And obviously, costs went up and things like that. By the end of it, I think we maybe did 48 or 56 pages. But you're still writing. If I was doing a match report, for example, I'm writing a 1,500 word match report, and flooring it up and putting all my opinions in it, and and setting the scene and trying to paint the picture for people. Whereas literally radio is the polar opposite. It's all about brevity. It's keep things as tight as humanly possible. I was trying to convey something, particularly with the news part of it, trying to convey something in a really tight time frame. Whereas you're writing something, you can be all sorry around it and really go to town on it. So I think on weekdays we've something like 12 or 13 news bulletins. So the vast majority of them are 2 minutes long. I think at 1 and 5 and 6 we've 3-minute bulletins. So they're your big bulletins. You've got your 5 and 6 year drive time bulletins, and people listen to radio at lunch and stuff like that. So you get a bit more scope to do something a bit more substantial. But when I say a bit more substantial, it's an extra. If I'm doing a story, if I'm not reading it, but if I'm putting a story together for a 2-minute bulletin, I'd maybe have to put something together of 40 to 45 seconds. For a 3-minute bulletin, you get as much as 1 minute and 10 seconds. And trust me, when you're trying to convey a really serious story, it's difficult. It's a skill that I had to learn. It's the biggest change I had to learn when I went to Cool. But there's a really good team there, and I'm one of them, certainly one of the older ones there. So you're working. There's a mix of ones coming out into their first job after graduating, and they're sort of not finding their feet because they're really good at their job, but they're thinking, well, this is what media is like. All media is like this. Whereas I'm coming from a different perspective. So I don't know whether I'm at. I wanted to get myself in trouble. I don't know whether I'm at where I ultimately want to be. I didn't think ever I'd want to get involved in broadcasting. I kept getting told by Cormac Campbell, that used to work with me, works at the BBC now, and Cormac repeatedly says, "You have a great voice you have a great radio voice. You have a great radio voice." And he's like, "You sure you don't mean you've got a great face for radio? Is that
that's the common insult,
Oh, see, if I had a pound for every time somebody told that, I wouldn't need to work. But yeah, so he always said that, and I never saw it. And part of my interview process was you had to record a mock bulletin. I had never recorded anything in my life, and I still have it. And I listen back to it now, and I compare it with what I'm on air now, and it's so different. But at the same time, for a first go, I was really chuffed with it at the time, So I suppose that shows the learning that you get and just the experience. If you do things and you take stuff on board, then you get better stuff. I have 20 years journalism experience, and I would say, bar obviously our head of news and sport and one of the other guys, there's three or four other members of the team, and I would say I have more experience in terms of years than they have combined. And that's great, because it doesn't mean I don't see myself going, well, I have more experience than you, therefore I know better. They have different ways of doing things, and I'm learning as much off them as maybe his hope they're learning off me. And I think from that perspective, that's a really positive, but it's a really positive sort of factor. It's not something I thought. It's not. I didn't envisage ever getting into broadcasting. Now I'm in it. Yeah, I certainly would want to stay in it. I do miss writing a bit, because we do stuff for the website and social media and stuff like that. But again, it's all about brevity. I mean, people nowadays, and even in comparison to the way I started, you lose people's attention much quicker now than you did at the start. Do
you think that's a reflection of the evolution of journalism, in so much as people have lower attention spans, and journalism, I suppose, has evolved to a point where people would quicker tune into a video than sit down with a newspaper. So do you think you've consciously or unconsciously kind of moved, your career has moved in keeping with the evolution of journalism?
I would say it's as much about the evolution of society as it is the evolution of journalism. I
Okay.
mean, you know what I mean. You've got, if you look at, for example, right, the invention of social media. So you had Facebook, you probably back at MySpace and Bebo and stuff like that. But for proper modern day social media, Facebook was the first one there, and then that was, you could write reams and reams and reams of stuff, and you still can. You can put whatever you want on Facebook. Then the next one was Twitter. So you were limited to, what was it, X amount of characters, 140 characters or 240 characters. So you're automatically cutting down on what you're allowed to put out there, and that was the entire point of it. Then you had Instagram, which was all photos, and you were only putting a caption on it. You know, you very rarely you putting a whole ream of words. And then you go to TikTok, which is just like, it's 20-second videos. So even that, and social media is the hands down the biggest influence on society, on media in general, on everything now, and to the point where there are a lot of good facets about it, but it is the worst thing to happen to the world, because it's ridiculously dangerous. We've seen that with Trump's elections and stuff like that. So I think in terms of what you're asking there, it probably, like the start of my journalism career, you naturally sort of progress somewhere. So you're probably right. What your question was, I probably nearly been guided by where society's going. It's not been a conscious decision, because I do miss the sort of long form writing, and I do still think there is a market for it. But even, like the broadsheets, if you look at, the Times or the Guardian or whatever it may be, you want to sit on a Sunday and have a big long read, with your breakfast with a cup of coffee or whatever it is. People do still do that, but not nearly as many as they did, and they would rather sit and subscribe to it online and read it online on their iPad or read it online on their computer. And to me, there's still nothing like turning the paper. Now, admittedly, I very rarely buy a paper, but it's just sort of going, well, you're immersed in the news as it is, so that's how you take your break from it. You just, okay, turn your phone off, or don't buy a paper, or don't watch TV. So you need to take that sort of, have that detachment in some way, shape, or form. But I think in terms of my career, it is just a natural progression, a natural evolution. And I think, with, as I touched on earlier, the amount of sort of graduates coming out and going straight into that broadcasting element, it automatically makes the pool of writers smaller, I suppose. And then, if you look at any sort of job description now, I suppose, for any media outlet, it's content creator, it's video journalist, it's this and that. I mean, our three things for every story we need to do: we need to obviously get audio for on air, we need to get a video interview, and then we need to do a web article. And so, that was almost alien to me. I mean, when I was a reporter, we had a website, but it was a bit archaic, to be quite honest, and it wasn't really going with the times where everything else was going. And I sort of started in the last few years, started doing video interviews for sports stuff, and they seemed to do quite well. But we weren't able to really monetize it because you're only putting it on social media. So maybe that was sort of the starting point, if you like, for where I am now. You're doing video stuff, and your interviews always had to be of a certain length of time. It's so many nuances to it, you know what I mean? But a natural progression where you think you just fall into what works for you. I mean, I don't think there's any jobs now that, features writer are almost a thing of the past now. Do you know what I mean? Columnists are almost a thing of the past. Nobody's sitting there and going, we're getting paid, £1,000 a week for, somebody famous writing £1,000 a week for writing 500 words. You know what I mean? It just doesn't appeal to people anymore. They want everything instantaneously.
Yeah, I wanted to ask then. Obviously, I think you're incredibly passionate about what you do professionally. But I wanted to understand what motivates you as a person.
What motivates me as a person? That's a deep question now. That is a deep one.
I mean, obviously, we can have many motivations for many different things, but I think in general, like,
can I include beer?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. What kind of drives you
I
to do
think
what you do?
to do what I do, I suppose. I think I have maybe a tendency to I'm almost like a do as I say, not do as I do type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I'm reasonably good at advising people, but maybe not very good at taking my own
Yeah.
advice. So, I like I like organizing things. This is the thing. I'm not very organized, but I like organizing things. Well, I'm a walking contradiction, Damon. But I suppose what motivates me is getting out and speaking to people,
Mm-hmm.
seeing what the easiest thing that we probably say every single day. What's the crack?
Yeah.
What's the crack? And that could mean a million different things. What's the crack? How you getting on? Are you okay? Or what's the crack? Heard, and then it follows it into something else. Heard you're doing this, heard you're doing that. Whether that's a story or not, it's just sort of getting out and speaking to people, being in sort of social environments. Getting to, don't get me wrong, stories come out of these sort of things, and it's not a case of every person I speak to, oh, I'm making a new contact. That's a potential story. I think just in general life, um, social interaction is hugely important, because going back to the social media thing is the least social thing in the world,
Yeah.
because you could be out and you're sitting like that there with your head buried in your phone, and yes, you do meet people through it, but it's not there's nothing like sitting talking to people. You used to be, obviously, when you were younger, you go to a nightclub or whatever, and you couldn't hear yourself think, and you'd meet loads of random strangers that were pissed, and then you'd never talk to them again, if you saw them out in the street in the normal light of day. But now, it's nothing better when you go down and going to the pub and having the pint with your mates, and then meeting people going, oh, well, I haven't seen you in ages, what's the
Yeah.
crack, or such and such, or somebody, the amount of times somebody will come over to you and go, yeah, you work for the Porter, or now it's, you work for Cool FM. And they'll either take the piss, or they'll go, well, what's it like? Pete's nodding, this and that, all the guy, and it's a topic of conversation. And I don't mind that. Like, I like talking to people. And I noticed that when I started in Cool, a lot of it it was hybrid working to an extent, but a lot of it is still doing stuff from home. And I suppose we like to have our journalists we've one up in the northwest, with me down here, we've one sort of Portadown, and then you've one over sort of the west. And it's like, that's good, because everybody sort of has their own patch, if you like. But then our studio's in Newton Ards, so you're either if you're in the studio, then you're maybe missing a story down here. So you could be sitting at home doing stuff at home, or doing Zoom interviews, or whatever it may be. But then you're still not interacting in the same manner with people, by getting out and about and talking to them. I think obviously that's all a relic of the pandemic, I suppose. But yeah, definitely the motivating factor for me is even when you might not, when everybody has their down days and their low days, and you might not can't be arsed to do anything, you don't really want to speak to people, but the best thing is to get out and talk to somebody, and
Mm.
I mean, like, I'm sure your last episode with Marty, I mean, Marty talks, I talk a lot, but Marty talks at twice the speed as me, like. And
Yeah.
but it is Marty, I'm sure, would probably agree. He loves getting out and meeting people. It doesn't matter who it is, having the crack and chatting away. Like, that's how I met Marty. I think I just met him down the street, and got to know him through there. So that's, yeah, I think, and especially the people in Uri. I mean, there's a sort of, I think when you speak to anybody who's not from Uri, they take they take the piss out of it. And it doesn't wind me up, like, because it used to, when I was young, it used to annoy me, like. And he's like, hey, hold on a second, like. But now it's just like, going, where are you from? And then I just find out where they're from, and just absolutely lace them for that. You know what I mean? It's like Newry to me, unless you're from it, only people from Newry can slag Newry off.
True.
Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, but
I,
anybody else does it, they're in trouble, like.
the second person I interviewed was Sean McCullough. He's a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
I'd never met him before, but I found him online. I thought I'd reach out to him. Really enjoyed talking to him. But he had, in a sense, he had taken gigs in East Belfast and places, but maybe not like all people from Newry. But a lot of us, we kind of live in that insulated bubble where anything outside Newry is foreign. And I guess that's true. I mean, if we're going to take the piss, and I'm guilty of it myself. But that being said, if somebody were to slag Newry, I'll be the first to say, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Um, But again, like I said in my opening, I've always had the sense that you've championed Newry, and I wanted to understand it. Was it something that you wanted to come across in your writing?
No.
Because
No.
I get the sense that you're incredibly proud of where you're from.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I said I lived in Liverpool 4 years at university, and I could have easily stayed over there. Brilliant city. There's loads of people from over here, over there, and I don't mean just Newry. Loads of people from Newry, but it was almost like a home away from home. But I don't know whether I'm a home bird or not. But in terms of how I feel about Newry, yes, every place and every town and every city, particularly in this country, has its bad parts and has its bad people and all the rest of it, and has the stuff that you'd want done better and all the rest of it. Anybody that says differently about where they come from is a complete bullshitter. From Newry's perspective, I mean, I always like to say, like, one of my best mates is Gary Wilson, who's the chairman of. Sorry, Cheapers. I've just elevated him there. He's the vice chairman of Newry City, and everybody knows Sparky. Everybody knows him, and it's ridiculous. And I'd say either of us, certainly him, but I'd say probably me as well. You'd walk into any bar in this town, and you would know somebody, and somebody buy you a pint and go, "Well, what's the crack?" And that would be it. And not that you would do that, because that'd be the worst. That'd be the most hellish pub crawl in history. But in terms of, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I think I would like to think I'm quite a loyal person. Loyal to the people that they care about, loyal to, like a team of support, loyal to the people I work with, that sort of way. But I don't think there's anything more loyal than being loyal to the place you're from. I mean, you can criticize it. It gives you an entitlement almost to criticize it, because you do care about it. And so therefore you go, well, look, it's coming from a place where you criticize where you criticize somebody from Newry or something that's happening in Newry, but it's coming from a place because you just want it to, you want it to be better, and you want to champion it. It's definitely not something that it's consciously sort of I've thought about in terms of my work, or in terms of my writing or anything like that. But I suppose it comes with the territory, when you have that platform. I suppose in terms of putting your opinion or putting a voice to. I'm not going to turn around and say I'm the voice of the people of Newry, because I'm certainly not. But if people know you and know the job you do, and they will come to you, especially if they trust you and they know you from, maybe they know your family, or they know, your dad used to be an insurance broker, and nearly everybody in the town used to be insured with him at some point or another. So it's like, Kieran Neil's son, yeah, you used to be insured. I was insured with your granddad, and blah, blah, blah. And you meet so many people like that who I've never met before in my life.
Yeah.
So they have that sort of family trust, for want of a better better term. I've lost my words now. But yeah, in that regard, yeah, Newry, I don't know what it is. Newry means a lot to me. It's just a lot to do with the football club as well. You know what I mean? We've grown up around it, and it's gone through its really dark days, like, you know what I mean? And you get the piss. I mercilessly get the piss taken out of me across grounds all across Northern Ireland. About Newry over the years. Like, but now we're sort of on a wee bit of an upturn, so I can dish it out a bit back. You know what I mean? So yeah,
I think one of the points I was going to make, and I kind of lost my thread of thought, but
it's probably because I was talking too much.
No. It tends to happen. I'll lose sight of where I'm going, and I have to circle back. But I was in Belfast at Queen's for a time. Didn't finish, but we were outside on the street or whatever, and I don't know whether a couple of lads had passed drunk or whatever, but they'd heard our accent. First time I was aware that I had one, in fairness. You think you're from Newry, we're kind of nondescript.
Yeah.
We don't sound like we're from the north, but equally we don't sound like we're from the south. And then they made the remark that we were culchies. And I was like, I thought I lived in a metropolis, Newry City, whatever. And here, these lads from Belfast had the impression that we live in the country. So, again, that was about, I suppose, I lived in a bubble. I wasn't too self-aware of our town and the people from it, and how we were perceived from outside. But again, like yourself, I'm incredibly proud of where I'm from. And my motivation in part in doing this was, I mean, if you were to put Newry under a microscope, there's a lot of good that comes from it, and a lot of people doing incredible things. I mean, you only have to look at football in particular. You had Peter McParland and Pat Jennings. I know the likes of Chris Coffey was over with Arsenal playing for the reserves. And I know a couple of lads that I played football with had trials and had been in England for a time. We have Ryan McGivern, was at City, and multiple other clubs for that matter. Um, so it's only when you really put Newry under the microscope that you can see there's incredible people doing incredible things. And that in part is kind of, again, you're probably not thinking of yourself, but you do, and I think you always have kind of championed Newry, certainly the football club, but I think in the broader sense, you've always championed Newry, which kind of leads me on to the football club. Because as I said on the outset was that if you were to cut you, I think your blood would run blue. How important has it been to you, the club, through all its ups and downs?
I would safely say, certainly at times, 100% of times, maybe not all the time, but 100% of the times, it's been the most important thing in my life, to the detriment of other aspects of my life, 100%. A lot of people I know will, maybe a lot of my mates will sort of maybe chuckle at that, and I understand that. I just think when there's something about it. I mean, you're a big football fan. It came from, my dad played a couple of games. He loves to tell us he played a couple of games alongside Pat Jennings when he was a kid. Nobody can understand how I ever played in the same team as Pat Jennings, but I'm sure he'd love to hear that. He loves telling the story. But it stems from, I mean, like my granddad was the chairman or the president of Newry Town at the time that organised the transfer for Pat Jennings to Watford. Mm-hmm. So when my granddad passed away, Pat rang up the reporter just randomly and asked me to interview him to do a piece on my granddad and Ken McGranda's funeral. And it was a nice touch because he didn't have to do it, you know what I mean? But he sort of remembered that, so that was passed down through generations. Passed down to my dad, as anybody who knows anything about Irish League football will know my dad, because he's the bane of every referee and opposition goalkeeper's life.
I've heard him use some choice words at the few I've been to, but
yeah, he tends to get a lot of personal information about people, which I really don't want to know how. But anyway, that's a whole other podcast. But yeah, I think in terms of the football club, and I mean the last. I've been supporting them since I'm 41 now. I've been supporting them since I was about 4 or 5 years old. And, I remember winning the County Antrim Shield when we were invited into it because I needed to make up the numbers, and Newry went and won it. And then I think we were kicked out 2 years later because you're going, actually, no, you're not meant to be playing in this. And winning it in the Oval and being in the change rooms, Wally Ralph and Harry Fay and Joey Cunningham and Tommy Gray and all those ones. And, when I was 5 years old and going and looking, these guys to me were absolute superstars. Joey Cunningham used to come out to my granddad and my dad's office in Downshire Road, and they lived in the house there that became the office. And Joey would just come out to see my granddad the odd day. And I'd always be kicking a football about, and Joey would come out the back and without fail would knock a football. Even just kicking 10 yards with a 5, 6, 7-year-old. And to me, that's like a kid nowadays having Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo coming to their back garden, and people will laugh at that. And I understand why. That's fine, but those guys were like heroes to me, and still are. And I'm lucky now to become friends with a lot of them, through work and through them coming down to matches and stuff. And that, I think, it just sort of grew from there. And then I suppose it ties in with then my job. You end up you're getting this. How lucky am I to be able to write? How lucky was I to be able to write about my own hometown club? I mean, very few people get to do that. Now, it is probably more regular in Irish League football. Everybody knows what club all the journalists support. What I mean? Now, it doesn't mean they're writing about their clubs every week, but everybody's quite objective and quite balanced. But I suppose since then, you just sort of you grow into it, and then obviously went away to university and came back, and it was a bit of a weird period because sort of they were hovering around. There was no transfer window then, and there were you had 10 new players 1 week, and then there was only 2 of them left the next week. That sort of story, and then I got involved with the club, just being supporting, going, well, look, why don't you utilize my skill set, and help out with the PR of it. And this was sort of before social media really taken off, or clubs were really utilizing it in the way they are now. So we got involved in the ill-fated time, I suppose, when for a few years before the club went bust. in 2012, so knew the ins and outs of it. And the two main protagonists in that, Jerry Flynn and Paul McKenna, weren't speaking to each other. We were trying to sort of sort it out, outside of court, and the only person that they were really speaking to, or one of the only people, was me. So one of them was phoning me, and I passed messages on to the other, and he's giving me a message to go back. And I'm no doubt I wasn't the only one, but you were just like going, how did this happen? So I suppose since then it's almost like a cut-off point. In 2012, the worst days ever. We were depressed. There was a lot of tears. There was no club. That's it. It's done. And then the story's been told to death. A million times. And myself and Ali, who's always your next guest, like we've done two documentaries on it. Telling the story, and the last 10 years under Darren Mullen have just been as good a 10 years they've ever had supporting the club. And there were loads of crappy days, don't get me wrong. We got relegated out of that, and then there's COVID and all the rest of it. But there's so many. The difference in it's coincided with like English football. So you're Man United, Liverpool supporter, whoever it is. Newry's rise has coincided with the game over there getting so far removed from the people. People now gravitate towards something they can afford more. To be fair, it's on their doorstep. But Newry, the previous guys of Newry didn't have enough of, in my opinion, weren't embedded enough in the community. There wasn't. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have 11 players from Newry. It's not the Lisbon Lions in 1967 where they all lived, with a stone's throw of Celtic Park. That just doesn't happen anymore. But there wasn't enough of a connection with the community, and there's a lot of people looked at Newry and going, well, no, I wouldn't go down there, or I wouldn't support them for various different reasons. Some of them were right, some of them weren't, in my opinion. But the big thing that they did whenever they reformed was become more embedded in the community, and they're still working at that. They're still building that, but that's seeing attendances rise. You're seeing loads of kids coming down and being as passionate about the club as I was when I was their age. And that's, to me, is the best thing ever. And the sing and the chant and they give it loads to the opposition fans and all the rest of it. And whenever we score a big goal, the players are straight in up the fence and straight in the middle of the fans. And there's a real connection. The biggest thing on top of that then is the players. Now, the vast majority of them are from the local area, from Newry, Mourne, South Armagh, Banbridge, Dundalk. Do have a couple from outside the area, but you see these boys down the street. You can go and have a pint with them in the social club afterwards. You can slag them off and tell them they played shit, and they'll go, fair enough. Like you be paying money every week, like I mean. But they become mates. And even when I was writing about them, they're still mates. Like, and so they would slag me, as I said earlier, they would slag me off about giving somebody, I give them 6 out of 10. And they're like, hold on a second, I was best player on the pitch. I should have got an 8. Like, well, now you're shite, mate. So that sort of stuff. I genuinely. Irish League football has that more of a connection with their supporters because of they should be, and a lot of them are the hubs of their community. The centerpiece of their community. You're getting there; it's not quite there yet, but I think we're certainly much better placed than we were 10, 15 years ago. Excuse me, but while clubs are the focus of the community, more so than the likes of your Man United or your Liverpool, or whoever it is, it's the people that make it. I mean, for me, one of the biggest facets of Newry as a club, excuse me, is from top to bottom. It's mixed. It's mixed. When I say mixed, I mean mixed religion. It's players are mixed, supporters are mixed. The board, the committee is mixed from top to bottom. Everybody slags each other off, like takes the piss out of each other. But you see, when it's about Newry, it's literally that's it. Somebody says something to you, I'll back you up. You know what I mean? And and that, to me, it makes me really proud, because there is no other club. All other clubs in the Irish League have mixed playing staff, all of them, including your Linfields one side, including your Cliftonvilles on the other side. There is not one other club has the level of mixed backgrounds that we have at Newry City in terms of the people who run the club and the volunteers. And that, to me, that's progressive. And I know we maybe shouldn't still be talking about this sort of stuff in 2023. We should have moved past it, but it is still important. I think it's a really important factor. And that's what makes me sort of love Newry as much, because it doesn't matter what background. To me, it doesn't matter what background you're from. If you're dead on, you're dead on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's sort of way. And to me, that's the biggest thing about Newry. And like, I'm not sure whether I knew of Darren Mullen, for example, but before he came in as an underage coach at Newry, like in 2010 maybe. But I didn't know him. I didn't grow up with him. Hadn't interviewed him before. Hadn't really spoken to him before. And then when we took over as manager, obviously we're building that relationship in terms of the paper. But then I would count Darren as a really, really good friend now. And even since he stepped down, you'd still be texting each other. You still go for a pint. And that's, to me, it's going back to the building friendships and through work, and that's a lifelong friendship. And he's a bigger supporter as I am. So it's just, and then when you've got new signings coming in, particularly guys that maybe are from outside the area, you very quickly sort of tell them what the club's about, and not maybe directly, but they very, very much get a vibe straight away of you introduce them to the right people, and they get an understanding of what the club's like and where the club wants to go. And yes, you want to go places on the pitch and all the rest, but you don't do that without the backing of the people. You don't do that without the backing, whether that's the volunteers, whether that's your supporters, your next generation of supporters, and you don't do that without being the heartbeat of your community. And while I think they're certainly more of a heartbeat of the community than they were, there's still a bit to go yet, but that's really important to me. Like, I want people. We used to go up to town and get after a match, after you get beaten 2-0 or 3-0 by Linfield at home, and you'd walk into the pub at 6 o'clock, and somebody would say to you, "Oh well, who beat you today?" They're like, "Well, Linfield beat us 3-0." Go, "No, you're fucking shite." That's all you would get. And you're like, well, you're sitting on a bar stool watching a Premier League game on a dodgy stream or whatever, like, at 3 o'clock. Why don't you go down and support your own team? Why don't you go down and support those more local players there? Go, well, right, fair enough. So then they got a whole team of local players, and the same boys didn't come down. Do you know what I mean? So there's some people you just can't convince. But now I think that it's a massive difference, and I think people are maybe starting to see it, and it's really important to me. It's probably been too important over the years, where it has been a detriment to other parts of my life. But it'll never change. I'm stuck with it now.
I'm kind of late to the party in so much as that I was fully aware that you and Ali were involved in the creative driving force of the documentary. Here we are, and if I'm honest, my brother went to the premiere. I think it was premiered at the Canal Court.
Yeah.
I don't know why I wasn't there, because I have, in some way, I played for the under-21s under Gary Quinn.
Yeah.
That's going back a ways. And then I featured once. I was called up to the reserves. Never played. And what probably annoyed me more was they didn't have a linesman. So I was here I am with the full shell suit, sub, and I was asked to do the line. Don't worry too much about the offside. And I was handed something ridiculous. I don't even know if it was a flag, but I was just there to feature if it was a throw this way or a throw that way.
Yeah.
But I still never failed to tell people, I went as far as the reserves.
You went a lot further than me, let me tell you.
Yeah. But I'm watching the documentary now. But I just seen recently that a young guy, Michael Canavan, I think his name is. I'm not familiar with the person. I don't know, but I watched this little feature-length documentary. And I think you featured in it. And not only yourself, but everyone involved kind of talked about the sense of community, the sense of family, and how important it is to them. I think, and what I wanted to sort of get across with respect to yourself and Ali, and I understand there's a lot more people as well that could be included in this, but as much as the club has given to you, with the joys and everything else that comes with it, I think you two in particular have given as much back to the club in trying to raise its profile. And I think that's an admirable thing. And it's probably been a labour of love for you, because it is your club. It's not felt like a job. And I think you have done wonderful things. I just want to let you know that.
I think that probably came out, and I appreciate that. And it is true. And I mean, I suppose it's certainly labour of love, 100%. And I mean, in terms of that documentary, just give a bit of brief context about it. I suppose that started in 2016 and sort of early 2016, and Ali had just come back from university, and he wanted to meet up for coffee, and he said, "What I'm thinking of doing this." And he was thinking of doing the 20-minute feature on just the history of the club, and at the time, I was actually in the process of starting to do a book with the idea of finishing it when Yuri got back to the Premiership, and not thinking Yuri would get back to the Premiership within 2 years. So, because I was thinking this would be a long time, we can do it bit by bit. It was like, so needless to say, it hasn't materialized yet. But Ali he started doing that, and then he actually sent it off to spoke with a guy from the British Film Institute, and who no interest in football, just looking at it from purely production perspective. And he said, "What's your hook?" He says, this isn't there is no hook here. This isn't gonna draw people's attention. So because I knew Darren and I knew everybody at the club, and Ali didn't really know a whole lot of people at that stage, as I'm sure he'll tell you, Darren gave us access to the change rooms from the get-go. So Ali was filming team talks and stuff like that, and just said, "Look, whatever you need." And that's been like that. It would not have happened without Darren Mullen's help. Absolutely not. And I didn't do any interviews for it because it's going, well, I interview people all the time, and they're going to look at me as a journalist. Whereas if you come in from a filmmaker's perspective, you probably open up a bit more, because you think I'm going to put something in your report at the time. But in that we think that Ali had a £500 camera, which is by modern day standards is absolutely crap. We didn't make a penny from it. We covered any costs we had. We had the Premier money we made from the Premier was used to make DVDs and cover a cost in that regard. But what it turned out as, basically, if I can describe it, sort of like a romantic comedy. So a romantic comedy at the start, you've got your two protagonists, you've got whoever they are, and everything's going great, and they sort of fall in love, if you like. So at the start of that season, we decided then to follow them through for the season. So it was going to be a year long. Start of the season, Yuri started off like a house on fire. We're running away at the top of the table, all the rest of it. So this is sort of in the context of the romantic comedy. The two people are, to find love and everything's rosy in the garden, blah blah. Then in the middle of it, they fall out, and that's it. The relationship's gone, and it's finished, and it's not for returning. It's midway through the season. Yuri went on this run, I think, of one win in about 12 games, knocked out of 2 cups. Darren's father, Raymond, passed away in the middle of it. And you're just going, oh, Jesus Christ, this is horrendous. And then from a personal level, I mean, setting this football aside, even from a personal perspective, and then Darren spoke openly about that in the documentary and spoke of his dad and invited Ali up to the house and stuff like that, and which is mind blowing. It's really credit on him. So then in the romantic comedy, you can see coming maybe the last half an hour of the film that the couple start to get back together, and there's hope, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And Yuri went in this run then from about the end of January to the end of the season, where I think they only had one defeat in 14 games or 15, might have been longer actually, maybe 19 games. Got to the playoffs, got promoted, and it's like the end of the romantic comedy. Everybody lives happily ever after, sort of thing. And if Yuri hadn't won that playoff, or if they hadn't gone on that run, that documentary would never seen the light of day. It would have been completely canned. It would have been a year's work down the tube. So we soon realised you're reliant on how the team do in the pitch here, because you're telling the story of a period of time as opposed to a general sort of history. For it to be received the way it was, we couldn't believe it. It was only really me and him worked on it. We had a couple of sort of extra cameramen. We were sitting in Ali's bedroom for hours and hours, but he edited stuff, and I couldn't, at the time, I couldn't edit for the life of me, but I was going, put this here, put that there. No, we don't like that there. And then we'd argue and debate over it, and we found out we would gel, we work really well together. And you were sitting the whole time going, if we can get this, if we can get this, if we can get that, and hopefully this game goes like this, and you're planning ahead, and you're almost taking your support for the club out of it. That what was the driving force, because if it had been Philip and Torn, you don't support them, so you wouldn't have been as bothered. But you had this sort of you were planning stuff ahead for certain matches and certain events that you going, okay, right, you were celebrating goals and you were celebrating wins, or you were despondent with defeats, but it wasn't having the same sort of effect on you because you were in the zone of trying to do something and trying to produce something really important. So the way it finished, the way it was received, the way people talked about it, we couldn't believe, you know what I mean? And like we would go back and change probably every single bit of it now. Like, you know, when you look back at it, it's like it's 7 years down the line. But there's bits that I remember watching. There's a bit at the end of it, if anybody's watched it, where it's the second leg of the playoffs. So we've won the playoff, the first leg of the playoff 4-0 against Armagh.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a slow motion bit where I think Decky Carville scored maybe the third goal in the 3-1 win in the second leg. And it goes into slow motion, but there's a song playing in the background. I can't, for the life of me, I can't remember what the song is. But I remember watching it. I remember sitting on my sofa, the headphones in about midnight when Ali had sent it to me. I'm watching it, and I watched it, I think, that 2-minute clip about 30 times back to back. And I cried the whole way through it because I just went, holy shit, this is actually, we've actually done, like, we haven't done this, we just captured it. You know, boys have done this, the players have done this, Darren's done this. You're seeing the supporters and what it meant to people, and you're going, holy fuck, this is you know, there was every sort of emotion going through your head. You were delighted you'd managed to help capture something really, really good, but you were just going, to me, what it meant to other people, and then going, well, if I think this is good, and they're going to think this is good, we'll see the whole thing. And they're going to go, I mean, they're going to laugh, they're going to cry, and all the rest of it. And the best thing for me was that the premiere, the night before, we literally finished it off the night before we did the premiere, and I just said to Ali, we need to dedicate this to Raymond Mullen, because we thought it was apt, and I hadn't told anybody. And then the closing credits, the closing scene just come up dedicated to the memory of Raymond Mullen. We let the credits play out, and then we were doing a Q&A afterwards, and I walked up, and Darren just stopped me, and he just sort of nodded at me, and his mum was sitting beside him. His mum was in tears, and his mum came over and just says, "Thank you very much." And that to me was just like, right, that's our job done. Do you know what I mean? That's all we need. If everybody else turns out and goes, that was crap, fair enough, that's fine. But that's to me sort of going back to the people thing and the humanity thing. You know, you were telling a story and you had to be sensitive about that part of it. But
it is. I mean, granted, I'm only halfway through it, but there is a very personal narrative in so much you're following the journey of this particular team, but it encompasses the wider coaching staff, and then it's very personal in so much as that element of Darren's life is brought into it. You know, he's living out in some way that grief on TV. I mean, there was some levity kind of brought in. A scene I just watched, I think they've been knocked out of the cup, and Darren's talking to the team, and he says, you know, I promised my father I'd win this cup, and somebody else says, well, you know, Nanny or Neil promised your dad that he wouldn't take a penalty, which was a wonderful moment. But I think, yes, you captured that moment, and it's reflective of the team's efforts. But I think, given your own personal investment, you and Ali, it's so important that you did capture it, because it's part of why I'm doing this in some way, because too often in life, people's moments, you know, we don't champion them enough, and very often they're not caught or captured or recorded in any way. But here you guys have invested a whole lot personally, and yes, the stars aligned in order that they gain promotion and you captured it. But I think it's a monumental effort, and I think your legacy in that regard, you and Ali, is secured, having put that piece of work together. I'm sure that whole team and everyone involved is so thankful for it.
They loved it, and I mean, I haven't heard anybody sort of being critical of it, and you know, we really appreciate that. I mean, I suppose that the main thing, the last thing for me to say on it is Ali, and you know, I've said this to his face numerous times. I mean, him become really, really close friends. You know, during that process, we were mates before that, but really, really close friends. And I'd be very close to him and his family now. Like, and he is hands down, in terms of the creative industry, and in terms of a filmmaker, in terms of a documentary maker, in terms of getting to the heart of a subject, is he's miles ahead of anybody in Uri, and I'll not even open that up for debate. In my opinion, he's an absolute. I don't use his word lightly. He's a genius in what he does, and I think it's just the vision he has for things is just, it's bonkers how he comes up with ideas and how he sees things in his head and then is able to transfer that to camera. It's phenomenal. Like, and he is the world at his feet. He could go and do anything he wanted, give him the right tools and give him the right opportunities. I just think there's a guy there that really is. If you talk about, I mean, Gally's from Bestbrook, loves Newry. I mean, he's originally from Scotland, but I mean, he's a big Newry man, a big Newry City fan, but he's a big supporter, big champion of people from Newry as well. And there is nobody I've seen as good as him at what he does. And it's not something I've no problem in saying it on this, because I've said it to him and I've said it to loads of other people. You'll get an insight into how his creative process works. I mean, by comparison, I mean, yes, I work in a creative industry to an extent, and that obviously that project and subsequent ones we've done about Newry are creative projects. But if I'm even moderately, minutely creative, my brain is just exploding with stuff. Sometimes to the point where he's trying to do a million different things at once. You know what I mean? And I think everybody gets that at some stage. But I can't praise him enough, and can't sort of say enough good things about him, because he's a good guy as well. Like, which is obviously key, but he's fantastic at what he does. He really, really is, and he's got so much of a bright future ahead of him.
I'd interviewed Gino Lynch. He was the first person.
Yeah.
And
what did
I guess I didn't know where I was going to go with this thing, or whether I'd even go past the first episode. I said in my last episode that I kind of just blurted out that I was going to do a series of 10 episodes before I realized what I said. But Gino had said Ali Mackenzie, interview him. I think obviously have the filmmaking in common, but right off the bat, that was one of the names that was thrown out there.
Yeah.
And you've been very good in your praise of Ali. I don't know that you will be, because he's given me a question to ask you.
Okay, well, given he's up next, I'll be giving you a question to ask him.
Yeah. So I just texted him. I suppose in trying to lock in an interview date with him, I'd also said that I was interviewing you. Mm-hmm. And his question for you was, where would you be without him?
That's a very good question, and one I would find very difficult to answer. That is a good question, and to be honest, in terms of, I mean, if it was just me even trying to set up the process of doing Here We Are, the documentary, or doing the playoff documentary with Carrick getting the Premiership in 2018-19, those are his ideas. I'm just coming along for the ride and assisting. In my eyes, and Ali would tell you differently, and would turn out and say, no, like, I couldn't have done it without you, patting each other in the back and all this sort of stuff. Like, but no, in terms of the creative genius behind it, where would I be? Nowhere in terms of documentary making, if it wasn't for Ali. So there's just that question. The little pricking and the texting now. After I've said all those good things about him, and now he's what I get.
Yeah, I think it's just an opportunity for him to wind you up.
It doesn't take much.
So talk to me about Darren Mullen. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts that go into a club and trying to make it work and sustainable.
Yeah.
Could you have imagined anybody else at the helm trying to resurrect a club and having brought it on the journey that it's been through?
Looking back in hindsight, no, absolutely not. I suppose at the time, as I probably touched on earlier, I didn't know Darren as a person that well at the start of this journey, and through over the course of the 10 years, when you're spending that much time in somebody's company, or you're interviewing them that many times, he's probably the person I've interviewed the most in my entire career. You get to know what makes people tick. You get to know what way they operate, why they are who they are, and why they are successful. If they are successful, and obviously he's been hugely successful. From what I can gather, he devours information in terms of, reading books, whether they're sports books, whether they're psychology, whether it's, a mixture of the two, whatever it is. He's really, he seems to be a real person for information, and been able to sort of retain a lot of it and then use that, whether it's it's sport related or not, but using that in terms of the stuff in your city. I mean, I suppose it's key to point out that a lot of people will know this, that he certainly wasn't just the manager of the club. I mean, obviously, as we know, he helped to sort of resurrect the club, in the first instance. And while there were certainly an awful lot of other key people that were there, Darren was the ultimate driving force about it. And I think he would readily admit this. While he didn't want to see the club, not return in some capacity, I would say there's probably a slight bit of, that's maybe not the wrong word, a slight bit of selfishness on his part, because he was due to be the manager that season. The season was cut short, I think, in maybe October 2012, and he was sort of coming in as interim manager, or he might even have been interim manager, and potentially get the job. And he was going, "Hey, there's my opportunity gone to manage my hometown club at a really good level." I certainly don't think he looked at it and going, "Okay, I'm going to reform this club, and in 5 seasons we're going to be back playing in the Premiership." It was certainly we all said at the time it was 10 years, and he got nearly back to the Premiership, win 5, suffered relegation, won a league, kept them up. Got up the Premiership and kept them up. I think that's probably his biggest achievement. I mean, the 4 promotions in 5 seasons it'll never be done. It'll never ever be done again. Warren Point were very close. I think they did something maybe 4 and 6 or 3 and 5 or something whenever they got the Premiership. But what Newry did to come from not even being a club to do what they did will never be repeated, and in my opinion, and most people's opinions. So, as a person, I mean, I suppose I got to know him as a person, and without seeing him inside the changing room. And I saw how he was with players, and obviously from the footage you can see in the film, you do get that idea of what he's like in the changing room. But there's always stuff that, to me, like the changing room is the inner sanctum. It's the part where unless you are meant to be there, you shouldn't be there. And it's always the part for any club or any organisation, any sporting organisation, that you shouldn't be privy to unless you have a right to be privy to it. But seeing how he is, I'm sure he would readily admit, like, we take a piss out of him about some of the signings over the years, and going like, "What were you doing buying that shoe? I got told he was rubbish, that's the way." Or he's taking a chance on a couple of players, because he's coming from a background. He's not coming from an Irish League background, if you like, so he didn't have the same level of contacts, and he built those up over the years. In comparison to the managers he was coming up against, who we played in the Irish League for years, dropped down a couple of levels. They had all these, they could phone up their mate at Glenfield and go, "What about him? What about him?" Whereas Darren was sort of having to maybe sort of work as he was going along, nearly. And so I think to do what he did, to take the club to where they were, not just on the pitch, but to build it up, or certainly play a big part in building it up. The initial stages, at least, off the pitch, is phenomenal. Like, and he's not one to blow his own trumpet. He always, I used to wind him up. He says this in almost every interview. He says, "Well, whenever I get too high, we win, and whenever I get too low, we lose." And I'm just like, I rolled my eyes by the end of it, like, because he'd be saying it so many times, and I've always referenced it to him. And he was always very measured in terms of his interviews, always very measured in how he spoke to people. Quite and have a crack with like everybody else, and he's not shy and retiring by any stretch. But the key for me is meeting people from other clubs, meeting people, other journalists that wouldn't have had a whole lot of time for Newry, if I'm being frank, and now do, because of their dealings with Darren, and because of their relationships with Darren, and because he's open and honest. He made himself available. If there was media wanted to speak to him, very rarely turned something down. If he did it very politely. Got his point across in interviews without giving enough away, without giving too much away, and was just a good interviewee. So from a media perspective, that in itself is absolutely invaluable. To be able to, the public image, perception's everything. And the way the club maybe was perceived in the past wasn't great by people from the outside. The way the club's perceived now is an awful lot down to him. And then the fact now you got Gary Boyle in now as a manager who was Darren's assistant for 6 years, and Boyler's a guy he'd known since he was like 8 years old. and he's very similar. You'll not cross him. If you get his bad books, then fair enough. That's it. But in terms of knows what to do, won't compromise himself to be polite to somebody, or won't compromise himself for anything else. But at the same time, knows what the club's about, knows what the people are about, knows what buttons to push and things like that. And so that's why I think it's a good transition. But in terms of Darren, like, I mean, we wind him up now. Like, now he's left. We were down and we do a pre-season trip to Dublin every year, and it was last Saturday. So Darren was on the bus with the players and supporters and the coaches, but as a supporter himself. And we were winding up going, hold on a second. I said, what are you doing here? He says, you're not allowed here. This is like Alex Ferguson handing the reins over to David Moyes. I was like, I hope it goes better than that, But it's sort of it was interesting just to see him, been doing that for 10 years since the club reformed, and he's just down enjoying himself and being able to relax, and not having to spend pretty much every week an hour thinking about outside of his work, thinking about Newry, and like it was certainly detrimental probably to his health, I'm sure, but his family, I'm sure, had to put up with a lot. I don't think people will ever really truly fathom the amount of work he did. And it's not a case of, right, that's you, cheerio, you're gone. Like, I mean, like, we probably should be building a statue for him somewhere, in the showgrounds, because that club isn't there. That club isn't where it is now if it's not for Darren Mullen. It's as simple as that. Like, amongst a few other people, but if it's not led to him, then no, you're not even. We may not have a club, full stop.
I wanted to then kind of start to wrap up, but I wanted to ask, if it wasn't journalism for you, what else do you imagine yourself doing?
It's a very good question. It's something I ask myself all the time, because I don't know what else was I ever really good at. Well, I mean that sounds like I'm saying I'm good at journalism, but that's for somebody else to judge. That's not for me to say. You can answers on a postcard, or you can ask Ali that one. Am I any good at journalism? I genuinely don't know, Damien. I really don't know. I probably would have liked to have done something business orientated. I've always flitted with this idea, even in recent years, of doing going back and doing like an open university degree in something, or doing a football coaching course, and doing your badges and stuff like that. But and I've no doubt if there's anybody involved in football listening to this that knows me, will probably be falling off the chair laughing. Going, what the fuck do I know about it? They're writing about it, not even good at that. But I genuinely don't know, because it's, I mean, since I get into it seriously, when I was, well, also when I went to university, so when I'm 18, and even prior to that, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I would love to be able to go, I think I would have done this. I think I would have done something business orientated. I would have opened up a business or something to that extent. But I mean, how successful that would have been, who knows? I mean, to use an example, one of my mates that I grew up with, nursery school, primary school, and high school, David Taylor, he's a counsellor. He's also Unionist Party. And don't hold that against him, and if your listeners, but David's like Steve Gulliner, he's universally liked across the board because he's a good lad. But I will never forget him saying to me, I think it was maybe first year in the high school, or it might even have been in primary school, and him saying to me, somebody saying, what are you going to be when you grow up? The usual question you get. And it was, well, I'm going to be a politician. Like, at that age. And I'm like, to me, that was really odd. I was like, going, who wants to be a politician at that age? Like, unless and he didn't come from a politics background. You know what I mean? So, proven he's gone and done what he said he was going to do. He's very good at it. He's very well respected and very well liked. He still looks a bit 12 because he's always a real baby face, but it seems to work. I suppose actually, when I think about it now, I think I touched on it earlier. My dad ran the Sam McCullough insurance brokers on the Downshire Road, and I suppose I worked there. Like, I worked there in the summer and helped out and stuff. So I could do you up a quote for car and house insurance. You know what I mean? When I was 13, that sort of way, and we were doing a bit of filing and things like that. And you knew how things worked. So I think probably obviously that business was sold. My dad retired and stuff. possibly I might have gone down that route, and the business may have kept open or whatever. It may not have. It might have gone on and done something else in that realm. But I'll always remember when I was younger, when I was very young, and mum and dad going out, and a few of the Newry players will go out with the Newry players even back in those days, and coming back to the house, and I'd be still running about as maybe a 5 or 6 year old when they're all coming in pissed, and one of the boys saying to me, "What are you going to be when you grow up, Gareth?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to go and work in the insurance business with my daddy." I'm going over my dead body yard because it's like family businesses. Nope, no, go and do your own thing. And I could never understand what it meant, or what you meant at that point. And the older I got, I went, yeah, it's probably a good idea. Go and forge your own path if you can.
I think it was in the Michael Canavan little feature piece that he done. I think it features both you and your dad.
Yeah.
And I've met your dad a few times. I doubt if you asked him who I was that he would remember, but through a mutual friend, Simon McCaffrey, I've met your father a handful of times at games. And he says in that little piece that those 90 minutes, he's a different person. I don't think in all the time that I've been at Newry and watched them play, and it actually got to a point where I started then to follow your dad as much as the game, because he won't sit down and he paces up and down. And obviously there's his colourful choice of words, but it looks like there's nobody more passionate about the club than he is.
Yeah, he definitely. I think my response to his comment about he was a different person for 90 minutes, and he says like, I'd say that I'm a lovely, easy going sort of. And I was like, I think you're being economical with the truth there. To be fair, yeah. Oh, like he's. It's quite funny because my dad he's pretty soft. Do you know what I mean? He's not, but when it is Newry, the one thing. You still get a certain section of your support, and I'm including mainly long-term supporters in this, will turn around and will be openly critical of players, of their own players, if they make a mistake or something like that, there and goes, it's fucking rubbish or something like that, which I just don't get. I don't get how one of your own players is ever going to be motivated by being criticised by your own team, especially on a local level where you probably know them. They can hear the exact words you're saying. It's different, maybe if you're at Old Trafford or Anfield or whatever. But it's one thing. My dad will abuse the referee. He would abuse the opposition goalkeeper, the linesmen, the opposition coaches, every single one of their players. But he'll never criticise a Newry player. Now he might turn around to me and go, "Jeez, that was shite," or but like whisper it, you know what I mean? Or we'll talk about it afterwards. But in terms of doing it openly, like he's a staunch defender of the players of the club, and I think if you asked him in terms of what you said about me being somebody that would champion Newry, I think Dad would have been very very much the same. Like I can't go anywhere without somebody saying to me, "Well, how's your dad? How's your dad? How's your dad?" Which I think is great. It's nice. You know what I mean? It's nice for people to ask how he is, and he's still knocking about. Like he's going to the gym 3 times a week. So I tell everybody he's now he doesn't. You don't hear him at pre-season friendly matches, right? So he doesn't miss a game pre-season friendlies the whole lot. So I just tell everybody, people turn around that know him from other clubs will turn around and say, "I haven't heard your dad." He's still in pre-season training. He's resting the vocal cords for the start of the real stuff, so that he can get stuck into when the competitive stuff starts. So yeah, he loves the football, like and he's probably worse, better, or same as me. If what would we when look at it in terms of that social interaction of getting down, and even since he's retired, getting out and about and talking to people. So just down and down the town. You could say he could say like I'm walking down the town. Should take him half an hour to get down, do whatever he needs to do, and get back up. Because he knows that many people, he'd be down the town. He could be 2.5 hours later. You'd be checking in on him, going, "Where is he?" Because he's just met that many people down the street. It'll be full conversation. So I talk a lot. Marty McGuigan talks more. My dad probably talks more than him.
Yeah, but I think it goes without saying that the club is and should be a central focus for the town or the city. I think it is a great outlet for people. I drift in and out, but I'm a Newry supporter. I've always flirted with the idea of getting the season ticket and showing up more often. But I fly the flag for Newry. Probably not as much as you, and I certainly haven't had the platform, and you've been great in doing it. But I hope that this 10-part series, which subsequently looks like it's going to go more than 10 parts, because I agreed to, finally, I got Darren Mullen to come on board. He's going to
Brilliant.
Let me talk to him. He's gone on holiday, but he's assured me when he comes back that I can talk to him. And I suppose he deserves a holiday. He's had 10 long years at the helm, and it's been an emotional roller coaster.
No, that man should be back. That man should be back to work. Yeah, well, that just means he's not going to manage anywhere else at the minute. So I'm happy with that. No, Darren's going to be a great guest.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to him. But with respect to yourself, and I've probably said it throughout, I think as it relates to Newry, the football club, yourself and other people, Ali and other people have been ambassadors for the club, whether officially or unofficially. You've been very good. And as much as the club have given you, I think you've invested as much back into the club, which I respect that genuinely. I think you've been very honest. And I wanted to ask the last question as it relates to, I guess, your profession. I suppose when you stop journalism and kind of walk away from it, what would you think people say of your work?
Ooh.
Or the body of work that you've put out there? You know,
I would hope that. I think the first thing any journalist should want, and certainly what I would want, is that I was honest. I didn't bullshit them. I didn't, I wasn't underhand. There are an awful lot of journalists out there that are underhand and bend the truth and twist the truth and don't tell the right story, and deliberately so. People can make mistakes, but a lot of people do it deliberately and bend the truth. So first of all, I would like to think that people would think I'd been honest and I'd been truthful and I'd been upfront with them, and I was direct. I'd rather just talk to somebody direct and faff about, and bluff them. As for my I suppose my standard of work, I mean, I suppose you don't know. I mean, I look back on things that I've written that I'm going, ugh, I could have been better. And that's more from a style perspective, written that word better or repeated words. And sometimes you don't have that much pressure in terms of time and doing things that you do tend to, you make errors like everybody else. But yeah, in terms of what I've done, up to this stage, I would like to think people that I've talked to before would still like to talk to me, and still, there are interviews you'll do only once, but there are people that obviously you're speaking to more often than not, and I like to think I've built relationships with people and that they would think I'm trustworthy and honest, and that goes for, I suppose, general life as well. As I said earlier, you can get very much carried away with being a journalist and doing whatever it takes to get a certain story, and that's fine if it's, if you're doing the thing right. If you're going out of your way to, be underhand about it, then it's not something I agree with. And just very, very briefly, I remember people saying, well, I think it was the news of the world, wasn't it, when it went bust, or it shut down, and people obviously straight on about the phone tapping scandal. And I remember loads of people I know on their Facebook friends just absolutely abused, sharing it. It was the big story of the day or the week and saying, oh, all journalists are scumbags and blah, blah, blah. And I was sort of like, oh, in the background, it's going, they were still, the vast majority of people at that paper or at any media outlet are good people. It's the same probably any walk of life. There are people who are a little bit underhand or a little bit, the bad eggs, the rotten apples, I suppose, in the barrel. But yeah, if I was putting it on my gravestone, I'd like to say, he was honest, trustworthy, and talked a bit of shite, but he was good cracking, and the end up like, I think I would sort of be, I'd be content with that, Damien. I'd be content.
I think that's all anybody can ask. That you're honest, a good bit of crack, and talk a fair bit of shite. Yeah, I think I'd be happy enough for that too.
Simple pleasures, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. As I said, I was always and had you always on my radar, because I think as it relates to Newry, there's no one better positioned to understand the story of Newry, its people, its character than you. And again, I was a little apprehensive because I have no journalistic background. Whether my questions are good enough, that will be for someone else to judge. But I really enjoy talking to you, Gareth.
A pleasure is all mine. And in terms of your questions, fantastic. I haven't talked as openly and honestly about a lot of varying range of things as I've talked about on this. So yeah, and telling you if you ever fancy a career in journalism, I'm telling you it's right up there. But that was great. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Hey, you're a gentleman. Thanks, Gareth.